Roses are red, violets are blue. I'd rather stay home and watch horror movies than go out with you. It's February. It is the month of love, the month of obsession, murder, blood. That's right. It's Valentine's Day. And there's nothing better to me than spending Valentine's Day watching a bunch of horror movies about unrequited love, doomed and failed relationships, and the slashing of hearts. In this video, I'm going to be talking about the best horror movies to watch to celebrate Valentine's Day. Let's get into it. First up is Spring from 2014. So this is a story that centers around a young backpacker who's backpacking through Europe, and he meets a mysterious and beautiful stranger who has a dark and monstrous secret. This one is a really beautiful story about love, and it also has some really cool body horror. Next up is Midsommar. So this centers around a group of friends who travel to Sweden to participate in this ancient midsummer festival, and they quickly realize that the people who live in this community have some sinister intentions. At its core, Midsommar is a story about a relationship at the end of its rope. We're following these two characters who are still forcing their relationship, and they are afraid to have actual conversations and communicate about what they want and what they don't want, and it just results in a really awkward and uncomfortable thing to watch. I really think that this is a very realistic look at relationships and how oftentimes people just stay in that relationship for the comfort. Honestly, this movie makes me happy to be single, and I think it would make all of you happy to be single too. Next up is Bug. So Bug is from director William Friedkin, who also directed The Exorcist. So this is a dark love story. It centers around a woman who's a waitress who encounters a mysterious stranger, and they develop this relationship, and it becomes extremely toxic and volatile. These two characters both have mental instabilities, and when they're put together, it just strengthens their delusions and paranoia, and we just really see what happens when two people are in an unhealthy relationship and how it just escalates to the extreme. Next up is The Loved Ones. The Loved Ones centers on a bratty teenage girl named Lola Stone who is used to getting whatever she wants, except when she asks this boy to prom and he declines her offer because he has a girlfriend. She decides that she's going to kidnap him and force him to have their very own prom in her house. But there's a lot more than dancing going on at this prom. There's a lot of torture, there's blood, and it's not pretty, and it's terrifying to watch. Next up is Crimson Peak. This gothic ghost story centers around a young woman who is fiercely independent, and she has big goals and dreams until she meets this mysterious, enigmatic stranger, and they fall in love. They get married, and soon he whisks her away to his mansion that is decrepit and falling apart, and he shares it with his weird sister, and soon the young woman realizes that there's a lot of ghosts, literal and figurative, roaming through these halls. So she investigates, and it's just beautiful. The setting of this is stunning. Just everything about this, I want to live in it, and it's just so beautiful and cold and dark, and it's just the perfect gothic romance. I just have to say this is not a romance you root for. I've seen people glamorize and romanticize the relationship between the two characters, but this relationship is effed up. It's toxic and unhealthy, and no, don't. This is not the relationship you want to have, okay? Next up is Valentine. So this is a slasher centered around a group of girls who are best friends. They've been childhood best friends, and now they're in their early 20s, and they begin getting stalked by a masked killer who wears a Cupid's mask right around Valentine's Day. So there's a mystery surrounding who this killer is and how he's connected to the girls and their past. This one comes from the director of Urban Legend, so it's filled with a lot of really cool and fun kills, and the cast is excellent. And I love that each of them is super fierce and independent and really in charge of their sexuality, and I just think that they're just so fun to watch, and I love them all together. And Denise Richards she's a queen in this. I think she's perfect. Next up is My Bloody Valentine, the remake. So I actually saw the remake before I ever saw the original, and while I like the original, the remake is more fun to me. So the remake is in 3D, which makes the kills a lot more fun because it really feels like you're immersed in the film and the kills are coming out towards you. So this centers around a small mining town that experienced this horrific tragedy where a group of miners were killed, and this one dude is responsible, but he goes missing. And then years later, these kids start getting killed off one by one, and everybody thinks that it's this coal miner who disappeared. And it's just fun. It's got some really gnarly kills. Next up is Pontypool. So fun fact is Pontypool is set on Valentine's Day. So it is the perfect Valentine's Day watch. This movie centers around a disc jockey who has taken a job in a basement radio station in this little small town of Pontypool in Canada. It's the middle of winter, they're very secluded, and there's not a lot going on until something does happen and a zombie outbreak occurs around the town. So what I love most about this story is that it is very subtle. You hear things rather than see what's going on. So it lets you really use your imagination. Everything that is occurring around the town, you learn about through listener phone calls, and it's just so unsettling. And the performance from Stephen McHattie is just incredible. I love this movie so much. It is one of my favorite movies of all time because of just how imaginative and creative it is. Next up is Swimfan. So this is more of a thriller than horror, but the situation is pretty horrifying to me. This is essentially a fatal attraction for teens. It centers around Ben, who is this varsity swim star at his high school. He has the perfect life. He's got an amazing girlfriend, a great group of friends. He's on his way to being a star in college. And then this new girl moves into town and she becomes fixated on Ben. And something happens between them and things get a little out of control. And this new girl, she falls in love with Ben, and if she can't have him, no one will. So perfect Valentine's Day watch. Next is It Follows. It Follows centers around a young teenage girl. She's careless and free. She's dating this new guy that she really likes, and she decides she's gonna have sex with him because why not? However, what this guy didn't tell her is that he has this curse that is passed through sexual activity, and he passes it along to her on purpose because he wants to save his own ass. And so she gets haunted where this entity will follow her until it gets her and kills her. The thing that makes this super scary is the curse. This entity is unrelenting and it can take shape of anyone, particularly your loved ones, and that's terrifying. It's just so scary. There's so many horrifying moments and just haunting imagery throughout this, and the soundtrack is incredibly creepy. It amps up the creep factor throughout this movie. It's such a good supernatural horror movie to watch for Valentine's Day. Next up is Honeymoon. So Honeymoon centers on a couple who are newly married and they are spending a getaway in a lakeside cabin to celebrate their honeymoon, and it goes horribly wrong because one of them goes missing and then returns, but they're not the same. This one is really creepy and it has some really just devastating moments between this couple. Next up is The Love Witch. So The Love Witch is a stunning film. It is an homage to films of the 60s, and it centers around a young, beautiful witch named Elaine who is basically searching for love, and she has trouble finding it, but she kills all the men she's dating because she puts spells on them. And I just think it's funny and it's very clever in what it has to say about the relationships between men and women, and it's really interesting that it's shot through the female gaze rather than the male gaze, and the film really makes you want to be Elaine. As a woman watching her, she just seems so cool even though she's doing these horrible things, and it's just a really unique film about love. Next up is Audition. So Audition centers on a widowed man who holds a fake audition to meet his next girlfriend, and he meets this beautiful, shy woman who seems like the perfect fit, the perfect girlfriend. But he quickly learns that she is a little mentally unwell. She also likes piano wire, and this man quickly realizes that you can't judge a book by its cover, and things go insane. This one has some really disturbing moments, but it also puts you in a place where you can kind of agree with the girl here, because this man should not have held a fake audition to meet his next girlfriend, you know? Next is The Brood. So this is David Cronenberg's divorce story. This centers around a man and a woman who are going through a divorce, and they're fighting over custody of their daughter. And during all this, the wife is dating this new psychotherapist guy who is putting her through this weird psychotherapy in this unconventional institution that he has. And while she's undergoing this, there is also a series of brutal attacks that are happening all around the town from these little mutant children. And soon, these little mutant kids get their sights on their daughter. So this story is just really bizarre, and the creatures are some of the most, the creepiest things I've ever seen. The story itself is just so layered and complex, and it's just a really well done story, and it has some shocking moments, and it's just, it's not what you expect. Next up is The Fly. So this is another David Cronenberg movie, and this is centered on a scientist who is essentially trying to discover a way to make teleportation a thing. He's created this machine to transport from one end of the room to the other, and while he's testing it out, he unknowingly swaps DNA with a fly, and soon he begins turning into a fly. And during all of this, he is carrying on a romantic relationship with this journalist, and it's really sad because she's put in this position where she can't really do anything about it. She can't stop him from living out his dreams, and she just has to watch as he basically whittles away into nothing. And it's a really sad story. Yes, this movie is gross and has gross moments, but I think ultimately it's a sad, tragic romance. Next is What Lies Beneath. This is a ghost story about a woman who begins hearing voices and seeing things all around her house that she shares with her husband. And everybody thinks she's just being crazy, she's just on edge, and she is convinced there's a ghost, and this ghost is trying to tell her something. So she investigates. This one leads to shocking conclusions. It has some creepy ass moments, and Michelle Pfeiffer is just so charismatic and endearing in this. You can't help but root for her and want her to be okay, and you want her to find out what's happening and be safe. And I just love this movie. I think it's so underrated, and it has some of the most disturbing sequences in horror I've ever seen. I will never forget them, and I don't want to spoil it for you if you haven't watched it, but you need to watch it. Next is Bride of Chucky. Bride of Chucky is really a story all about love. It centers around Tiffany, who is Chucky's longtime girlfriend, who brings Chucky back into her life. And rather than being grateful to his girlfriend for rescuing him from the pits of the police investigation evidence room, he decides that he's going to kill her and turn her into a doll too, because misery loves company. And narcissists want to make you feel miserable. I think this is a really fun entry in the Child's Play series, and it really introduced us to a lovable villain in Tiffany. Next up is Francis Ford Coppola's Dracula from 1992. This gothic romance revolves around Count Dracula, who discovers that there's a woman who is basically the reincarnation of his long-lost love, and he sets out to find her and sweep her off her feet. And it's Dracula, so things don't go very nicely. So I feel like a lot of people are coming around to liking this one more now. I think it's beautiful. The performances are not as bad as everybody says. Gary Oldman is great as Dracula. It's just so ginormous in scope. It just feels huge and like a blockbuster, and I love it. Next is The Invisible Man. This one is the remake, starring Elizabeth Moss as a woman who is severely abused. She's in this extremely toxic and abusive relationship, and she finally escapes it, but soon after, her abusive ex ends his life and he leaves her his fortune, and she suspects that he's doing this in a way to still have some type of control over her, because that's what abusers do. And she's right. And he might have created a suit that makes him invisible so he can gaslight her from the grave. Honestly, this movie is terrifying because it is gaslighting to the extreme. Elizabeth Moss, her character in this, goes through so much hell and no one believes her, which makes sense. Why would you believe that there's an invisible person attacking you? And it's just terrifying. It's terrifying to see her go through this. It's scary because it's based in reality, aside from the invisibility part, that people go through this every day. Abusive relationships are a thing. And I think this is the perfect example of an abusive relationship and what a person goes through to get out of that relationship. And lastly, we can't have a Valentine's Day movie marathon without watching Bride of Frankenstein. So this is a sequel to Frankenstein, and it centers around Dr. Frankenstein, who is basically forced by his monster to create a wife for him because he doesn't want to live a lonely life. And it's funny, it's sad, it's a great second entry in the Frankenstein film world, and it's basically a retelling of Frankenstein, the first one. I like this one better than Frankenstein. I think there's a lot more emotional connection with the monster in this, and it's heartbreaking to watch, and I love it so much. And the bride is just beautiful, and I love that even though she's created to be this monster's wife, she still has that mind of her own, and she's still like, no, I'm not going to do this. She still has this sound mind to still make her own decisions, and that's really cool to me. And she's not having it, you know? She doesn't want this monster. She wants to do what she wants to do, and that's pretty cool. And there you have it. That is my list of horror movies to watch for Valentine's Day. Please let me know what movies you plan on watching. If you like any of these movies on my list, I'll also link down to my Tubi recommendations list because you can watch some of these movies on there. And I'll link all my social links down below so we can connect on there and chat about spooky Valentine's Day horror movies. And I will catch you next time, guys. Thank you so much for watching. Bye.